Good morning and welcome to our third in the series for unlocking value from our data privacy and how do we get value from an information framework. My name is Daniel Robus and I'm proud to be here with the team from Altron and Micro Focus, and we are looking forward to an interesting debate. Once again, I'm joined by the three amigos. I think the gents have been walking along road in these three sessions. So we are joined by Gareth at my left, the audience is right, Don sitting next to me, and last but not least, Grant. All three of the gentlemen have a passion for privacy, working in privacy and around privacy and enabling privacy for customers on data privacy, security, and governance. And we've gone through the last two series on how do we decide on a framework, how do we get value from the framework to enable it, what's the migration that the team needs to go through internally. And today we're really going to get to where the rubber hits the road, and we're going to be asking tough questions regarding how we can get actual business value out of a data governance framework without listening to big words and TLAs or three-letter acronyms. I think that it's worthwhile talking around who we have here and why we have taken the time to get them to speak with you so that you understand their background. And in preparation, I was just asking the gentlemen why they've chosen to work in this environment. And what seems to be coming through is the marked way that you can make an improvement on an organization by instilling data governance and privacy around the systems and processes. So Grant, who's a data privacy manager, is moved from the consulting side and moved into data governance and privacy. He comes with a wealth of experience from a practical perspective. Don, a data privacy and governance specialist, comes from the project management side where they converge and used to going through gates and managing customers and making sure that we're achieving what was set out and understanding scope, understanding the realm of what we want to do and understanding how to get it done with percentage of success. And then Gareth, he speaks for himself, is the channel distribution manager for Micro Focus and ensuring that we've got the foundation of systems in place. So that's quite a mouthful to start with. People don't want to hear from me. We're going to get over to you guys. We agreed that we would look at 4 key areas for this discussion on how do we increase business efficiencies, reduce risk, ensure sustainability of business and adding to sustainability of business, and lastly, getting to cost savings behind data governance. So I've prepped a couple of tough questions and I'm going to get right into them now. Let's start with the money. How do we get into cost savings through initiatives such as this? And I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. So the cost saving part of data access governance is when we first do discovery on the platform. So it's interesting because people tend to save everything for the past 5 years, 10 years. They plonk it down on a server and they leave it there. Now, where the cost saving of that comes in is a simple thing like, for example, space saving. Because space is money. I think we said this in the webinar too as well. You know, you have things that one of the very first things that we conduct is a thing called a redundant, obsolete, and trivial data scan. Yes. So that is data that actually shouldn't be on your servers from a risk and from a cost perspective. They are costing you a lot of money per gig to store. And then also the other thing is, in this day and age, when you digitize and you move a lot of your data into platforms like the cloud, where your storage spaces are a lot more expensive than on-prem storage, then you also have to look at migrating only what is necessary. Okay. So that's where the big cost saving and the big value add of that comes from.
Grant, are you finding that customers, before you arrive and enable this framework, are missing opportunities to find these cost savings just because it's too complicated?
That's a good question. So sometimes we do, depends on the organization and the maturity of the organization and how they've approached it from a framework perspective. They might tackle a task from a technical aspect. So they look at it to achieve the objective with a technical product, and to look at that, they don't necessarily measure the cost savings associated to that. And then the use case, so as with Don's example, what is my cost savings from a data redundancy and obsolete and trivial reduction? Also, right sizing of my information to make sure that I have the right information in the right place. I can access it. Those are all the things. And a lot of the time, what they'll do is they might do the scans, but they don't then take it to the next step of trying to enable those cost savings associated to the findings that we have.
That's awesome. I want to ask you, Gareth, with the exposure that you've got to customers, is the cost saving just the first part of the business case, or are you seeing customers that are actually tracking it throughout the life cycle of the deployment of systems that are, or frameworks like this?
So ideally, the cost savings are not really the first part of the business case.
Okay.
So most customers don't go into it with a view of cost. They're looking, they go into it with a view of risk mitigation, okay, which is their first and foremost primary driver. The other thing is around, obviously wanting to meet the compliance legislation that's been set out by the government and the regulator. However, as they start getting further into the projects, so cost saving starts becoming a bit of a sweetener for them. Okay. Because they start realizing that once you understand what it is, what it consists of, and how it relates, there are a lot of soft kind of cost savings that come in as a result of it. The biggest challenge we have with the overwhelming amount of information we have out there is that it's often very difficult to understand how it's all associated.
Okay.
Just because of the very nature and the way in which we operate. Data centers have many systems, many silos, many different places in which to go and address information or harvest value out of it. And ideally, this is the culmination of all of those things.
Yes.
When a system like this comes into play, we pretty much touch all of those information silos, and then we can literally start drawing lines between them. And those have an enormous amount of cost savings associated to them.
So it's almost an unlooked for benefit that's going to come through. The cost is always a factor, but it's not a predominant factor that would restrict our rollout of a data governance framework and enablement. I just want to talk to the audience for a moment. This is an interactive session. We cover all areas of the business here with the IP that we've got in the room. So if you've got any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll get to them. I'll have a look at them. That's why I've got a computer screen here and a WhatsApp group that's going. So feel free to throw any questions at us, and I'll address them to our panel and get them answered for you. I want to circle back to risk because you jumped ahead. We're going to come back to cost a little bit later. Risk as a driver, how do we take benefit from risk? Don, we're going to come back to you. How do we reduce risk through a governance framework effectively? And what is the meaningful impact it's going to have on the business from your perspective?
So, as Gareth said, one of the main reasons why companies actually goes on this journey, especially in the last 2 years, what we see in the market, is because of the risk factor to it. There's obviously a regulator that's coming into force now. There's the Papaya Act that's coming into force now. So that actually leveraged the...
That took us 3 minutes to get into the Papaya Act. Okay, we're going to carry on with it. That's 1st of July is around the corner.
Yeah, it's 1st of July is around the corner. So it's actually very high on the priority list for a lot of the companies because it does come with quite a bite. So the risk factor there is one of the biggest things that is actually the driver behind one of these projects at the moment when they start it. From a risk perspective, along with the ROT data that we scan and we look at the risk, for example, there's a tie in between that companies ask themselves about. Previously, this situation of we store the data, it's there, it's got no real value, and there's no real reason to it. Now with things like this act coming in, there's going to be more stringent questions posed on that. Like, why are you storing the data? Why are you storing it for a certain amount of time? Why are you storing it correctly? Do the right people have access to it? And those all create business risk that you need to mitigate because that is what the regulator will be looking at in their audit.
So is the contra not true that customers are just going to start storing everything and secure it because of the regulator and what they do? Do you think records management now is becoming more and more of a mainstream discipline in the organizations, Grant?
Yeah, definitely. To answer that question straightforward, so yeah, definitely. Just to add to what John was saying, and your question is, no, you can't store. The contract can't happen. You can't just say, because we've had those conversations, but I'm just going to store everything because that's going to make life a lot easier. So that says you can't just, you have to have information for purposes of use.
So not a solution out there, guys. Don't just store everything.
Yeah. Also, the opposite of that is true, where people are like, well, let's just go control alt delete. Well, no, you can't do that either. and the challenge is people, the starting point, and you ask them a risk-based approach, but people don't know what they have, or organizations actually don't know what they have within their environment. And that's where we do that discovery of information, both structured, unstructured, dark data. And then we apply that risk. And within that, we adopt a records management. So one of the evolution in that, if you haven't gone down the records management, is we create the policies and the procedures associated to the records management, identifying the records, and then adopting that, whether it's been a records management system or whether it's in a myriad of systems, and orchestrated with like a microphones technology. That is being adopted because it's one of the things and controls that's been put into place to manage data, and also within the life cycle. So records has a life cycle associated. It's got a disposition process that needs to happen. It's got a retention schedule that needs to be associated to it. And we're seeing a lot more people taking note of this. That's not just information going, well, it is, but that's not just because of Papaya, but the benefits is not maybe cost savings, but it's mitigating expenditure. So, if you know what's in your data and you have it in a life cycle and you have it with a retention and you've got an action to take on it within a period, relying on people is very risky. Okay, and spreadsheets, that's what a lot of organizations do. So if the systems are managing it for you and it's properly developed and properly designed, you potentially could avoid expenses that you shouldn't have had. Or you could also look at proper disposition, defensible disposition, we call it.
So this automation of the framework, getting the framework in place, are you seeing it as a foundation to launch programs that we're hearing about, such as AI, such as RPA or robotic process automation or real edge computing? Is that one of the unlooked for benefits that we're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a brilliant thing, right? Because that's where it's all going to head to sooner or later, right? The human being is not designed to manage petabytes and petabytes of information. Okay. So, the nature of this game is that as time goes by, so more and more automation will come into the process. And there's a fair amount of it today. So we obviously design and set up a fair amount of that automation in terms of being able to classify types of data, etc. But ultimately, there's going to be a fair whack of automation coming into it. And things like robotic process automation, things like auto classification, things like machine learning capability, these are all enablers to help us manage the large volume of information that we actually have and that we store.
Okay. So the unlooked for benefit is we can actually automate the business process. Got an interesting question that's come in from my favorite person, anonymous attendee. We'd like to thank you for joining us today. Does data governance restrict agile application development? I'm going to go back to you for that because I know this is an area of yours.
No, so they're actually two different streams of things, right? So the first thing is that when you're going through agile application development, there are many things that need to be considered. So obviously baking in security, while it's developing that application is often a good idea, right? Coming back with the security thing after the application's being developed is or released is kind of a bit silly.
Yeah.
So the stream of application developments is on one side. What we fundamentally look at is the records that sit within those applications. Okay, so it has no effect on the development cycle of the application.
Okay.
However, what it does do is we bring a great deal more security over and above the application development cycle. So the retention of the columns and rows that sit within the database, the encryption of the actual columns and rows of the database, masking out personal identifiable information. So we actually enhance that
So a data governance framework actually works hand in hand with an agile approach to application deployment. That's quite nice. I'm going to come to you, Don. Do you think our project management teams are in a governance framework in mind to deploy these transformational projects? Have we trained our people? Sorry, let me ask it straighter. Are people equipped to take advantage of this?
Yes and no. There's a lot of companies that have actually gone through this exercise in the past 2.5 years. They've spent a lot of resources on training the people about PI, PCI, and PMI data. Now to handle it, because it pops up on a day-to-day basis during the course of business. But what we have also seen, and this goes back towards the maturity that that Grant mentioned, what we've also seen is there has actually been companies that has not. They are, unfortunately, from what we are seeing, not entirely sure what route to follow, what the journey looks like, where to start, where it will end. So it's a very difficult thing because it's going to depend from business to business as far as whether they're adequately prepared or not. As far as the project management teams, it depends as well on what project you're working on. In some projects, you're going to have it. Obviously, a project manager is, for example, responsible for the governance on the project. So that is going to put a little bit more strain on the project management team. So they should have gone through sufficient training. But then you'll have the next project where it's not necessary and they subsequently won't.
Okay. Just for the audience out there, we've done 2 webinars on this series. And the second one was, how do you enable your teams to take advantage of this? If you are sitting and you don't quite know how to embrace this as part of your everyday vernacular, go and have a look at the webinar that was done. The gentleman broke that down in sufficient detail, and you can always come for an appointment with anyone on the panel, really, to talk around how do you enable your teams. The risk sounds like a real primary driver here, but you know, risk management is like paying insurance. Everybody really doesn't enjoy it unless something happens. Let's talk around efficiencies. What sort of efficiencies should we be looking at? And I'm going to come over to you right here, Grant. Talk to me about how we can change an organization from an efficiency perspective by embracing governance by design.
Very good question. So it's one of the key drivers that we look at from an efficiency point. Obviously, understanding where your data is, how your data operates within your environment, and how it interacts, how the people use it, you know, is key. But an item that we look at, if you had to look at from an efficiency perspective, is process. Okay, so simple. We understand the processes, we understand the securities around those processes. We then look at the enablement of those processes and the efficiencies around those processes. So let's check a practical example. Right to forget, if we had a look at that, that's coming up. Okay. How do people acknowledge, or how do organizations acknowledge that they have looked through their systems and confirmed that that data has either been purged or is still required potentially? It might be on legal hold, it might be, you know. So to do that effectively and efficiently, you need the systems to be able to enable that, and you can understand. So that's one of the processes that you would look at. So we've got a multitude of these use cases, and just going back to the digitization, you asked Gareth on the emerging technologies and how they're contributing. You know, those are starting to play a big role. And a lot of people still use manual-based processes, physical paper, still very pertinent in organizations. You know, obviously with the COVID and that, people have adopted technology a lot faster, Teams being one of them, but it's still pertinent. People are using paper, and that digital adoption is growing at a drastic rate. But that in itself, we bring efficiencies by understanding the data, putting where the data belongs, accessing the data, collecting the right data. So that all helps in an efficient process design and the contribution thereof. Again, the records management is a prime example. You know, you've got efficiencies around records management, where the system applies the correct policies associated to it, and based on that policy creation, we'll make sure that it follows the workflow associated to it, so that human intervention is minimized, and also that they're not, you know, relying on people to remember things. So,
Gareth, are you seeing that policy and systems are finally talking to each other? They used to never touch. And I've got a couple of examples where you will implement a system which can enable something, but it goes contra to policy, such as leave, but that's a long story. Are you seeing that policy and policy makers are becoming more ingrained because of governance and are paying more attention to the applications, systems, and processes that we automate?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, ideally, anything that was information related was always just left to the IT department, right? And, ideally, IT are the people who provide the platform to host the information, but they are really not the people who make the rules around how it should be treated. So, the big shift has come where, policymakers are closely aligned with line of business and closely aligned with information technology to really ensure that whatever is being hosted or housed is actually meeting policy, is being managed in the correct manner, being disposed of in the correct manner, being used for the purpose in which it was intended for. Okay, which is a really big thing, So, we have this obligation under the PIRE Act that you can only really harvest information out of that information for the purpose it was intended for. Okay, so, the policymakers within the organization are the custodians of the policy. IT are the custodians of housing it. However, there's that nice kind of marriage now happening between the two where they host that information based on policy.
Okay, that's interesting. I think that leads into the next area for me, which is the longevity of the business and how governance by design, deliberate, predictable governance is helping businesses continue, grow, scale. And it leads me, do we get to KYC through governance by design? So know your customer. Is that the holy grail of where we are going to, or is that now just an assume?
I can add to that. So yes, it's one of those soft benefits. Okay, so it wasn't initially designed for that purpose. However, by following this practice, know your customer does come in, because like I mentioned earlier, if you touch all of the information within an organization sitting within those silos, you can then start understanding how pieces of information relate to one another. Okay, so by having a kind of single pane of glass view of an information topic, okay, allows you to kind of have a know your customer kind of scenario. So if the name Gareth pops up in a database and there's some unstructured documents that have my name in it, and there are some topical elements that you are looking for associated to that, you can start drawing the lines between how these things actually relate to one another. So it does kind of build a comprehensive understanding of an information topic.
Okay. So it's an opportunity for us on an enterprise level to re-look at our reporting. Do you see a lot of that in where we're going? Are people giving enough time to look at their operational reports with this new information in mind?
Yes, there certainly is a much higher focus on reporting, but across all four pillars of the data access governance part of it, which is the analytics part of things, which goes, for example, just spoke about. So then you also have things like, for example, your risk, knowing where your cost saving is. So there's some, if you have proper reporting in place, which is what a lot of these systems now focus on as well. You want to be able to open up a dashboard, single pane view, contextual view of what is going on from a data perspective in the organization.
Okay.
That has actually become quite important. It's actually one of the big drivers as well when a company chooses a platform.
Okay.
It should be, because, like I said, IT doesn't own that data anymore.
Okay.
So it's a report that should be easily understandable. It should be drillable. You should be able to, as a normal end user, go in and see where your risk is, down to a granular level.
Okay.
Because the devil, unfortunately, in this is in the details.
Okay, so in the previous sessions, we were talking about predictive analytics, in context, in time reporting, and then past reporting from a security perspective. The framework that Altron's bringing to the table, do we go through all of those hurdles before we get there? So as part of the project, we would look at reporting to change it to take advantage of this.
It's an automatic that comes as part of it.
Awesome, awesome. I've got a question or a comment from Prishal. Does data privacy and governance help around test data management, especially in DevSecOps? Okay, who wants to take that? Go.
So yes. It's actually an interesting.
You can't do that on a webinar. We expect open.
I'm going to give you the reason.
Okay,
That's
come
a
on.
very good question.
Let's try it again. Go.
That's a very good question. So practical example is, yeah, so you need to look at the data sets that you're using ultimately, and how you're doing development around the data sets. It's something that we're seeing from a use case perspective pop up a lot. Customers that are using production data within a development environment, especially now that you've got distributed development environment, people working from home, things like that, they're not sitting particularly on the organization's network from a security aspect. So you need to minimize your risk on the data sets that you're using, but you also need to have a data set that is referenceable to the production data set that you're using. You can't now use such an anonymized data set that it doesn't give any bearing to what you're actually trying to achieve. So anonymizing or securing that data, is very, very important. Just to give you a practical example of what is happening, and there's cases out there that you can search is, the ransom attacks are actually going for data.
Yes.
So what they will do now is, if they find data sets on somebody's laptop, they will take their data, and then the ransom attack will state there that we have got GDPR data, we've got POPIA data, or there's many legislative. And then what they'll say is, if you don't pay this amount, they'll obviously report you to the authority. Okay. So it's a very good question, and it's something that's overlooked a lot.
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. We've got another question from Elwin. As discussed, who is the owner of data and information? If policymakers do policies, ICT is the area of storing and securing of the data and information. From a governance and risk perspective, who provides classification of data and information? Who's up for that one? Okay, come on, Gary.
Give that an answer. So basically, like I said in the last webinar, we all have a responsibility, okay, to make sure that we help the organizations we work for protect that information. So every employee. However, there are, the data protection officers, as an example, compliance officer, who would be the custodians of the policies within the organization. Ultimately, the buck could stop with the chief executive officer. That will be the fall man or fall girl, so to speak. If there is a breach, because some of these laws contain jail time. Ultimately, we all have a responsibility. As mentioned before, even leaving a piece of paper on a printer containing personal information or company records is a no-no. Not saving information to the correct places as per company policy is a no-no. Out-of-place restores, not having encryption on your drive. These are all the factors that really contribute towards that. So,
but who has the last say on classification? Is it the business lead?
It's pretty much from our experience in the South African marketplace, for those who are large enough, have a privacy officer that really has the last say, or a privacy officer
on classification.
On the classification, they work with lines of business to make sure that information is classified correctly. There'll always be a touch point, but they ultimately would be the custodians of how that information is managed, classified, stored, deleted, etc.
So we moved from an area where IT is responsible for the framework of the systems, business is responsible for the process that's going through, and then there's someone else that decides on the classification of the data in consultation with it. Is that what you enable through the Altron data governance frameworks exercises?
Because exactly what you explained now, that's exactly how it works in most cases. IT is responsible for keeping your storage up, making sure that
lights on, rooms available.
Business is responsible and for for making sure that the business processes follow. Because data access governance actually changed quite a bit of business processes. So they are very closely involved. IT is responsible from lights on perspective. Business is responsible from business process needs to work. Money needs to keep on flowing. Business continuity needs to carry on. Then, like I said, you have in some of these bigger organizations, you've got either a risk officer, a data risk officer, a data custodian, that person will champion this process or this journey inside business. And they ultimately become the project sponsor, the project lead, and the custodian of the data.
Grant, how important is the business analyst in this world now? Is there a resurgence in the business analyst now?
So they're very important to the point that when we look at the impact to business, I mean, just repeating what we were saying is that the IT enablement is required, definitely there. But the best practice and the usage of that is through the findings and the data and the gathering of information, and typically it starts with the business analysts. I think also the role of the business analyst might have changed traditionally. They need to understand data governance a lot more. So there's a lot more in-depth knowledge that they'll require to gather the benefits that data governance brings to the table. And it also brings a lot of opportunities in how do they marry the business requirement with the technology ultimately, and how do they get those business benefits? You mentioned the efficiencies, costs, and things like that, and meeting the legislative requirements.
So this cloud explosion we've had over the last 5 years, Gareth, and this work from home due to the pandemic, and just the massive migration away from big buildings, the irony kills me. The type of team that you're putting together here, has it changed its focus now? Is it more multidisciplinary? Is it honing in specialists? Is it generalists? What type of people should the business be looking at to put a governance framework in place that's going to make a meaningful impact?
So again, it depends on the business. I mean, obviously, cloud plays a massive part in all of this, right? People are, businesses are continually moving workloads to the cloud in a big way. There's a lot of benefit to be leveraged from cloud platforms, right? So cost reduction, management, doing more with less, being more agile in terms of IT. Cloud brings a massive amount of benefit to that. So, and I'm going to talk in the context of the South African marketplace. Not every customer has a business analyst, a project manager, a compliance officer. So in some instances, this stuff's outsourced to the likes of us, right? But traditionally, you need some systems integrators. You would need to have a project manager. You would need to have a business analyst. And you would need to have somebody that understands a little bit about policy making within the organization or understand policies. So, those are the types of people that are really needed to ensure that projects like this are successful. However, as I say, not every company has that luxury. Okay, so this is the reason why we went to the lengths of putting together the practice so that we can go and satisfy a larger area of the market. So for instance, a manufacturer might deal with sensitive information, but ideally that's not their core business. So, this is where we would come in and provide, that white space in terms of people and process to help them meet this objective.
So people don't have to panic. There is an answer there. There is the paint by numbers, and we've spoken about it in the 2 previous sessions about how to get going so we don't spin tires. That being said, this privacy by design, is it almost a discipline that you need in your head first, or is there a paint by numbers? We just follow the process.
There's pretty much a basic paint by numbers where we can follow the process, and we've kind of built a framework end to end to help with that. So a series of workshops to understand the security considerations, have a look at the policies. So there is a paint by numbers. However, again, a telco will operate vastly differently to a hospital chain or a medical company or even a law company. So, what we tend to find happening is the paint by numbers is the foundation. And then what we have to do is we have to consult through a very consultative process, understand where the differences are from our paint by numbers and kind of slot those in.
Okay.
And
So
this-
the nuances of every customer are going to be different.
And there's also other elements to it, right? Just the last point I want to mention on that is that a lot of South African customers have already started on this journey. Okay, so some have already gone and looked at policies, others have already gone and maybe looked at a certain area of their data silos. So again, we take our paint by numbers. We don't just throw away whatever they've done, right? So we make use of it.
Yeah.
We tend to ingest it into our practice and say, right, well, these things have been put in place. So maybe, as an example, PwC could have helped with the policies, as an example, or a law firm like in ENS Africa could have come in and given them the direction on, how to go and make sure that they've got the right policies in place, etc. So again, we don't just throw that away. We'll ingest that in,
Yes.
and basically then work with that to slot in the balance of the pieces of the puzzle.
So if people want to engage with this team, we don't have to throw away what was done already over the last couple of years. So it doesn't have to be transformational. Taking our topic, which is how do we take benefit from data governance, we can do it on a small level and then grow, or does it have to be enterprise-wide and overweighting? What do you think, John?
So you can start small,
Okay.
and then you go from there, because Rome wasn't built in a day. And
Okay.
you also don't want to completely disrupt business, which is what you will do if you go with the top of a big bang approach.
Okay.
It's a small adoption, and I think I said this previously as well. It's a user change, it's a mindset change, and you're not going to change your mindset today. If I tell you to do something different, I have to tell you over and over, because it takes 21 days to create a habit. So it's something that starts small, and it's a wheel that starts rolling. So you eventually get into the thing. That's why we very rarely talk about implementations. We talk about journeys.
Okay.
It's a journey.
Okay.
When we say journey, we're talking not weeks here, we're talking months, longer. So
we're talking about cultural change. We're talking about hearts and minds here. I put down a question, which was, how does the nature and structure of good information framework assist with managing data access compliance? Bearing in mind, Papaya is 1st of July. And you can take any area of that question that you'd like, but is it going to make a meaningful change having the framework publicly accessible by employees? And what would you say is one immediate benefit that we're getting out of that? I don't know if you want to take that one.
One immediate benefit that you'd be getting out of it is understanding what data you have.
That's it.
Is key. You need to understand what you have. If you don't understand what you have, you can't put correct policy, procedure, access controls around it. So that's the biggest benefit.
I think ideally you can't manage what you don't understand.
Yeah.
So that's that.
We've circled back to that now 3 times. Are you seeing customers out there commonly not knowing what data they're storing? Huge, really.
Specifically on unstructured.
So to give you some examples in the South African context, we've seen records on systems going back to the 80s, okay, where that organization was only legally obligated to keep those records for 10 years. Okay, so that's point number 1. Point number 2, in most use cases we've seen, 60%, circa 60% of what's stored in that data center doesn't actually need to be put under management. Okay, so in other words, 60% of that information has little to no value. Okay, so, one of the examples I always give is, if you have a data center and you have 3 petabytes of information in that data center, that has a cost.
A petabyte is fairly big.
That's fairly big, right?
Okay.
Okay, so it's 1,024 terabytes is a petabyte. So 3 petabytes is a large amount of information. So to give you an idea, everything that is in that data center has a cost, and its cost is about storing the information that sits within that data center. However, the management tends to be 4 times that cost. So the point I'm trying to make is that if 60% of it is not needed, and you've got 4 times the cost to manage it, it's kind of like a ripple effect. And the problem being is with mankind, our very nature is this keep everything forever type thing.
Mm.
And it really is a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea for litigation matters, because you only want to keep it for as long as you're legally obligated to keep it. You don't want to keep it for a longer period of time than that. But the nature is that we keep everything forever. And ideally, because we've never gotten down to the grassroots of actually saying, well, once upon a time, disk was cheap, so just throw some more disk at it, right? Or, servers are coming down in price, and we'll just add some more servers, build another data center. Ideally, nobody really looks at the management costs. Nobody really looks at the insights and the understanding of it. And really, less in this instance is better.
Okay.
Keep what's valuable and get rid of the rest.
So he with the most data doesn't necessarily win.
No.
That isn't the aim of the game anymore. And when we are looking at storage of this data and accessing of the data, do you think a benefit of this is just rethinking the way we look at our data from a perspective of where we're using it? How much of your time is spent just talking around why we are doing things the way we're doing it during these engagements?
So it goes back to efficiency.
Okay.
And I can ask you exactly the same question. So let's say, for example, you have a document, okay? And you've got 5 versions of that document saved in a space. And the only thing that's different between them is there's a few slight changes in the document, and the timestamp of the documents are different.
Mm.
Now you have to go look for a piece of relevant information inside the document.
Mm.
Do you want to open up all 5 to go through it, or do you want to open up the most relevant document out of the 5? Now, if you translate that into clicks and seconds, just from a time perspective, that's already where one of the efficiency comes in. That goes towards, for example, record management.
Okay.
Looking for things in the right place. Looking, for example, going to the right place the first time and finding the information that you need. Contextually, the right information that you need, that actually makes sense, that has business value. Because out of the 5 documents that you have, 4 of them has no business value. 1 of them has business value. So that's where one of the invisible or hidden efficiencies come from
a data governance framework, effectively deployed. Okay. I wanted to just make a comment there. These companies, 60% of their data storage not required. Are they the same companies that didn't pay bonuses last year? Just one question.
I'll plead the fifth.
Yeah.
But just to add something else he said there, which is, I think, something that also a lot of people miss out on, right? From a court of law perspective, we talk about the 5 documents, we talk about 5 or a piece of information. What matters in a court of law is, how does it relate? What was the sequence of events that led up to that topic? How can you prove that it hasn't been tampered with? Okay, how can you prove that you're only legally obligated to keep it for 10 years? Okay, well, how can you prove to us you kept it for 10 years? So those are the things that are relevant. Okay, and that's one of the benefits of Springs is this piece of information was created, it was sent to Joe Blog made this amendment, it was sent to another person, this person then changed that, altered that, so that was the sequence of events.
Okay.
And that's actually very important.
Okay. So if we think about the cloud sprawl we're talking about cloud migrations from on-prem into cloud, into different data centers for processing. How does a data governance framework assist in integration of systems? Does it have any play there? Does it have any sway there? Does it have any relevance to that? Maybe you want to take that one.
So on the aspects of the cloud migration and the relevance between the various systems, so those are 2 aspects.
Yeah.
I'll answer the first one. So cloud migration, we would look at first, Don mentioning contextualization of data, so relevance to the information. So if you've got information within systems on-prem, before you do the cloud migration, you want to try and add that contextualization so that you can deal with the benefits downstream, such as the analytics options and things like that. When we also do the data discovery, we remove the redundant information, leading to what Gareth was talking about, the fact that don't migrate your entire data. Just because you got it on-prem doesn't mean you need to put everything in the cloud.
Okay.
So we look at that remediation, what we call a remediation process. And a remediation process is not as simple as what people would think, because a lot of these systems have been around for a long time, and even file shares and things like that have a system and process dependencies.
Yeah.
So we need to look at that remediation process and how do we enable the migration process. From a systems or a data governance aspect amongst various systems, it's almost like the orchestration of information. So if you're able to orchestrate information or passively control information from a system, Gareth mentioned single pane view, but also what you would want to do is you don't want to have records replicated in multiple areas, but you also want, if you are replicated in multiple areas, make sure that they're all up to date, so information is up to date and relevant within those systems. And you need to be able to have a system that enables you to orchestrate that information, but also bring that back to you to say, okay, this is what's represented, this is how it's represented, and this is what we can do from it.
So it's going to make the integration between systems that much simpler, which means we can get that business process enabled quicker, which means a quicker go-to-market.
Prime example, use case, somebody changes their surname and you've got 32 different systems. The chances of that, how long would that take a business if they didn't have something to enable that change?
Okay.
Or with an operator, they might do it within a single operation, but they might not do it in the next operation. Okay. And if there was some sort of contact and somebody had to make a contact with on a contract and they'd say, but my contract now, I've changed my surname, but I gave the update and there's just the disparity between the two. So that enablement and orchestration between systems is a prime example.
Okay. So having that hub and spoke agreed, we understand who's the master data, understand master data management is critical in today's rapid agile environment. I've got Priya asking a question again. Is data governance the new big brother? Watching everything we do. Absolute power corrupts most people, absolutely. I added the most. I have all the power here, Rochelle. But it's a great question. Is data governance the new big brother? I can see you chomping to answer that, Carol.
You know, after 15 years of being involved in this particular discipline, I've always been a champion that I really believe that data governance can actually change the world. Okay, that sounds ridiculous, right? But ideally, you know, there's a few things. So the first thing is that majority of corruption still takes place on physical paper. Okay, right. The second thing is that, you know, the regulator didn't bring this act in because, you know, the government decided it wanted to make some money of people for not being, you know, compliant.
Okay.
You know, people need to understand that in South Africa specifically. The regulator brought this law in because there are a whole bunch of ramifications that are offset as a result of this law not being in place.
Okay.
Okay. So, you know, there's no such thing as unorganized crime. Let's take it away from the data center and let's talk about what happens out there, right? There's no such thing as unorganized crime, right? It's organized crime.
Yeah.
And crime is really driven off information. Okay, it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
So, you know, intelligence around information leads to organized crime. And I mean, that's just one example. Okay, and there are many more. So you know, ideally, I'm a big champion of this, especially for South Africa, because I believe it's going to resolve a lot of the country's problems. Okay, so the big brother thing is kind of doesn't always ring true because really, you know, what we're trying to do is we're trying to protect individuals' information.
Okay.
And it's about, again, using it for the purpose it was intended for, you know, and not for the purpose it was not intended for.
Okay.
So it gives the individual the power also to manage their information and what it is intended for.
Okay.
So
And that's a theme for Papaya. It's like, don't just take my data. Tell me why you take my data and I'll let you know if you can.
But also, so Papaya was derived from the GDPR Act.
Yeah.
And the GDPR Act was originally written with the intention of saying that you, Mr. User, are the owner of your data.
Yes.
So you choose what happens to it.
Okay.
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 And it goes towards things, for example, like to forget and what information is stored about you and what to do with that information.
Okay.
That's where it actually gets. That's the real backbone behind this thing.
Okay. I've got a question here. Kwabisa Mazizi has asked 1 minute to answer this question if you can. This is an elevator pitch. What data governance solution does Altron offer? Who's taking that? Grant, are you taking it, or Don?
I can take it.
Go. Come on, you got 1 minute. This is the test. The CEO is watching.
1 minute. So no pressure. Yeah, so we offer a data governance framework that covers basically it covers maturity and it covers a methodology within that framework. We look at from a data privacy perspective, we look at the lifecycle management, we look at the security aspect, and then we look at the analytical components associated to that. And depending this is our partner, Micro Focus, has a full suite that covers that from a technological aspect, and we are able to offer in those various elements, depending on your maturity as an organization, multiple spoke of consultancy, applications, or the ability to extend your maturity and gain better data governance through these engagements.
So you don't mind if the customer's taken a TN forum framework or AIIM framework. You work on top of that to enable it from a business perspective.
So yeah, so we know those AIIMs, we know those frameworks, but we work on top of that and we enable with those customers.
Okay, so you're actually hanging the clothes on that framework. You're making it come to life. I hope that answers it. I thought that was a great answer, by the way. I've got one more. To Gareth, would you consider encryption as a condom which protects your crown jewels? Please elaborate if possible. That may be the best question we've ever had. I'm just putting it down there. Okay.
So firstly, I'm from Rudderfoot, so I don't know how I should be answering.
Yeah.
But you know, encryption again is a component. It's a subset.
Okay.
Okay. It doesn't give you all that is required. And as you know, condoms are only 99.9% safe.
Yeah.
Well, the same thing applies with encryption, right?
Okay.
You know, you need to have a great deal more associated to the methodology in order to meet the PAI. So, you know, to give you a real life example, we have customers that just say, you know what, this database or this piece of information sits behind a myriad of firewalls and is encrypted with 256-bit encryption and. But, you know, they're not looking at the retention of it. They're not looking at the discovery of it. They're not looking at how things relate to one another. They don't have the audit trails behind it. You know, encryption doesn't provide all of these things. So the short answer is that really you need to go beyond encryption. You need to look at the discipline.
Okay, I love that answer. Guys, we've got 8 minutes left, and I'd like to ask 3 specific questions of each of you. I'm going to look at them. I'm going to ask you to pass through them. We're going to start over here, Don. What is the most exciting technological development in the next 6 months that you're looking forward to?
So I've stated this in session 2 as well. The contextual search functionality and the machine learning part of things is actually being developed, and the way that is actually progressing. I think this is, and I want to add on to that as well as part of that, is one thing that we've said through this whole session. It's a common theme that's coming through. People need to understand that data access governance is not just a piece of paper. It's not a poster saying, don't put your hand in a cookie jar. You need a system that actually looks at what hands are going into that cookie jar. Okay. It is like I stated in the beginning, people can't manage petabytes of data. It is system driven, piece of paper stating what is going to happen. It's not going to be sufficient anymore. There needs to be better controls in place.
Trust is no control, people. Trust is no control. Grant, what are you excited from your stable?
From our stable, I mentioned our framework. I didn't mention the data side of things, but within our framework, securities is key. So it's on the upper end of the maturity aspect. Like I said, our framework consists of maturity and methodology and the framework holistically. But we're deep diving into the security space. We're working closely with our partners on that. And just going back to the question that Gareth has asked, I'm not going to repeat that one, but there's multiple security aspects. That encryption doesn't fit everything, and we're looking at the various aspects of securities and how do we apply it, and how do we apply it across the various architectures or enterprise architectures across there. Okay. So that we're quite excited about because it's something that's getting huge traction.
Awesome, Gareth.
I think what I'm most excited about is I've seen how this act being brought into play by some of the early adopters has made such a significant difference to their business, right? So, I mean, I'm going to use Discovery Health as an example. And Discovery, you know, I mean, they've done some pretty good things. They're not a customer of ours, but they openly state what a huge difference it's made.
Wow.
To their business, you know, and they refer to it as the best thing since sliced bread, right? It saved them a huge amount of money. It enabled them operational efficiency. It reduced their risk. The thing I'm most excited about really is I can't wait to see that kind of technology being adopted by public sector. Okay. I really believe that these technologies can make a massive difference to public sector within this country. Okay. I still believe that public sector is very, very paper heavy. Okay, as the first starting point. Secondly, there are inefficiencies in certain areas. And I think that, you know, once these types of things are embedded into public sector, I think it's going to make a huge difference to our country as a whole. And I'm a champion for that. I'm a champion for that, and I really want to see that happening.
So just because you answered that so well, I'm going to ask you, what is your focus for the next quarter? And I guess you could say for the next until 1st of July. I think everyone's in this room maybe focused on that.
So I think, you know, our primary focus for the next quarter is to obviously, you know, really get out to those customers who really need the help, right? Okay. And there's a lot of them.
Yeah.
You know, there are customers out there that have been almost, you know, lambasted with this, that they know that they have a priority to get it done. It's just about how to get it done. And I mean, you know, we're trying to get to as many of those customers as possible to try and simplify this journey, to help them along this journey. That's the biggest focus point, you know, going forward.
Okay. You're going to pause there. We've only got 3 minutes. Grant, what's your focus for the next quarter?
For the next quarter, I'm going to reiterate a little bit what Gareth said, but to add to that, so we're seeing a huge increase of customers coming to us and saying we're in this stage of our maturity or this stage of our journey, and our focus is to assist our organizations to accelerate that to what is capable according to the risk. And then internally, our focus is to expand our offering on what we're seeing is where the market from emerging technologies are going. So we're looking at those technologies and how do we adopt those technologies, because once our customers are on that journey and ready to adopt them, we'll be able to assist them with that.
Excellent. What's your focus on?
So, seeing as me and Grant work together very closely, it's very much the same as this. But then also one of the things that we are trying to do right now is, because of this looming deadline, we are actually trying to help as many people as fast as possible, just get them protected and out of a risk situation like that.
So it sounds like you guys are not hunting for customers. People are now knocking on the door because the deadline is looming. What a blessing. What a nice place to be.
It's a good place to be.
It's a good place to be. It's a combination of both as well.
Okay. So then I'm going to start. We're going to play table tennis again. For people in our audience who are not Altron customers and we're happy with that, what advice would you give them moving forward based on a governance framework and taking value from a governance framework?
Okay,
and the answer, joining you as a customer, is not acceptable. I want some solid advice.
Okay. So I think I said this, Nana, and I touched on it very briefly. Having a policy on a piece of paper is not going to cut it anymore. You need to put yourself in a position where you are physically able to show how your data is being managed in a responsible manner, how you're managing your privacy of that data, how your defensible disposition is being managed. That is not passing the buck to a person. It is at the end of the day, it is a very system-driven, application-driven, platform-driven process.
Okay.
So there is a reason why we have technology partnerships.
Okay.
It's definitely, you have to go and look at what systems are in place to actually help you with this journey.
Okay. Well. Thank you. Good. Grant?
Just one piece of advice: if you haven't started yet, start formulating a plan. It's not just the stick method of the act that's coming along, or the various acts that are in play, or various legislative drivers. It's the benefits that data governance gives you holistically, that we mentioned. And it's not just a handful of people, it's not just IT, or it's not just the CEO's responsibility. Data governance is a culture, it's an adoption, digital adoption of how people use data. So,
we've got 30 seconds and then we're over. I've got one more question for you. Ask the advice. And one snippet of advice for a customer that's listening.
Partner with the right people. I know that's not what you wanted to hear, but
No,
really, as a tool manufacturer, tools are only 20%. People and process are the balance. If you're out of your depth, bring in the people who can help you.
I think that's an excellent summation. I think that's a good summation for the whole talk. We had Liesel van Rooyen asked us, do you have any case studies or success stories of implementations that were done? Refer to the website. There will be a link to the panelists on this talk. Reach out. They have got huge information for you. From my side, we've been going for an hour. It's felt like 10 minutes. Guys, I'd like to thank you. I know some of you are more comfortable and some are not. You guys have been a very nice panel to talk to. Thank you for allowing me the privilege of interviewing you. For our listeners who are going into papaya season, good luck for that. If you've done the work, you don't need luck. If you have a framework, you don't need luck. And if you have the right partner, you don't need luck. From my side, Daniel Robus, I'd like to sign off and say have an amazing day. Thank you very much.